Great.
Where?
You got that matching eye like Patty. let fall away all that might distract us from the wholehearted practice of love. Welcome all to East Rose. My name is Eric Chewy, and I'll be your worship leader today. East Rose acknowledges that for at least 13,000 years, many tribes and bands have made their lives here, where our church home and our communities now exist. We remember and honor these people who made their homes in this land, the ones here now and those who lived before. In peace may we share this land and honor one another. Let's take a moment now and greet each other here today, both in the chapel and online. Please stand and face the cameras by the clock on the back wall and wave hello to our friends online. And now you can turn to your neighbor and say hello. We will have opportunities to continue our greetings later. For our online guests, if you'd like to share a joy or sorrow during a portion of the service, you can do so by entering it in the YouTube chat, and those will be shared aloud with everyone. I also encourage you to identify yourselves in the chat so we may better acknowledge your presence with us today. And now we will have a responsive reading, The Values We Share by Reverend Tess Baumberger. So yellow will be the call and white the response. This has been adapted from the proposed revisions to Article 2 of the UUA bylaws, which we are talking about today. There. So as Unitarian Universalists, we covenant congregation to congregation, and through our association to support and assist one another in our ministries.
We draw on our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love.
We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love.
Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. Inseparable from one another, we celebrate our shared values.
Interdependence. With reverence for the great web of life and with humility, we acknowledge our place in it. We honor the interdependent web of all existence.
We covenant to protect Earth and all beings from exploitation. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice. We will work to repair harm and damaged relationships.
Pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology.
We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect.
Justice, we work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive.
We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive democratic processes to make decisions within our congregations, our associations, and society at large.
Transformation, we adapt to the changing world. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect.
We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically.
Generosity, we cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality.
We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources.
Equity, we declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness.
We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities.
Systems of power, privilege, and oppression have traditionally created barriers for persons and groups with particular identities, ages, abilities, and histories.
We pledge to replace such barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect.
We strive to be an association of congregations that truly welcome all persons who share our values.
We commit to being an association of congregations that empowers and enhances everyone's participation, especially those with historically marginalized identities.
Chalice lighting words are from Tracy Johnson. We kindle our chalice flame this morning, awakening the fire of our ancestors in our hearts. Beacon of freedom held out to light the way. Light of reason illuminating the path. Spark of courage igniting our spirits. Aglow with hope for all we endeavor to do together. And now Reverend Robin Sucker, our pastor, will give us the opening words.
Thank you, Eric. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good to see you. Our opening words today are by my colleague, Monica Jacobson Tennyson, The Heart of Our Faith. She asks, What is it that calls you here, that calls you onward, that calls you inward, that leads you homeward? What is it that gives you the power to make a change, to ask that question, to take that journey? What is it that says you have done well, that asks you to learn more, that brings you to stillness, that holds you up in hard times? It is relationship, the beating heart of our faith. It begins when we share this hour, our truths, this air, silence and song, our hearts. Come, let us journey together. Our first hymn is number 347 in our gray hymnal. The words will also be on the screen. Please rise as you are willing and able to sing Gather in Spirit. Gather the Spirit.
Good morning. So today's story is called That's Not How You Do It by Ariane Hoffman-Maniyar. And this is a story about meeting new people with new ideas and different ways of doing things. Whether we're talking about two friends, a classroom, or a community, people don't always agree on things, and that's okay. Sometimes when someone shares a new idea, we might even be tempted to say, that's not how we do it. But hopefully we treat each other with kindness and respect, even when we have different opinions. When we disagree or talk about change, it's important to remember our shared values that bring us together. Disagreements or new ideas don't mean we stop caring about one another. With patience and understanding, friends and communities can grow and stay connected, even when faced with something new or different. Okay, that's not how we do it. Lucy knew how to do everything. I sure do. She knew how to eat with a spoon and fork. She knew how to play the xylophone. Lucy knew how to do gymnastics and how to build a tall tower. She knew how to paint an elephant just right and how to fold perfect stars. In fact, if you didn't know how to do something, you came to Lucy for help. Everything was fine until the day Toshi arrived. Hi there. He did not know how to eat with a spoon and fork. That's not how you do it. His music was strange. That's not how you do it. Toshi's gymnastics were all wrong. That's not how you do it. And his tower wasn't half as good as Lucy's. That's not how you do it. He did not know how to draw an elephant like she did. That's not how you do it. And when he started to make a paper star that was all wrong, Lucy couldn't keep quiet any longer. That's not how you do it. Hey, Lucy, this is for you. What? This is lovely, Toshi. What is it? It's a paper crane. Will you show me how to make one? Yes. And will you show me how to make a star like this? They had so much fun that they made a whole flock of paper cranes and a night sky full of paper stars. The end. One of the best parts of being in relationship with one person or many is the opportunity to learn from each other and to grow together. And now we leave Reverend Robin and the adults to continue this conversation while we continue on to our classroom. So if the people along the center aisle will form a bridge, we will sing the children out.
So I invite you now into that quiet time in the service when we regroup and get ready for receiving the rest of the message of the service together. So I invite you to close your eyes and put your feet on the floor, uncross your arms, put down anything you might be holding, and drop your shoulders, relax your face, and take a very big exhale to start. See how much spaciousness you can create inside yourself just with your breath. It's really all you need. So we're going to begin some intentional breathing. 4 beats in slowly through your nose, 5 or 6 beats out slowly through your mouth, creating spaciousness, calm, openness within yourself, your head, your heart, your body, from the crown of your head to the soles of your feet. And just breathe. No high thinking, no planning, just breathing and being. So we'll breathe together. Stop and feel, breathe, and allow. Slowly bring yourselves back into this space. A few more rounds of breath, then another big exhale of gratitude for your breath and for where it can bring you all by itself. Our quiet song is As Tranquil Streams. It's number 145 in the Gray Hymnal. The words will be on the screen. Please remain seated for the quiet hymn.
The reading is Which Way by Louis Fisher, and it was written in 1922. Universalists are often asked to tell where they stand. The only true answer to give to this question is that we do not stand at all. We move. Or we are asked to state our position. Again, we can only answer that we are on the march. We do not stand still, nor do we defend any immovable positions, theologically speaking. We grow and we march, as all living things forever must do. The main questions with Universalists are not where we stand, but which way we are moving, not what positions we defend, but which way we are marching towards community and what is true and meaningful.
Perhaps you have noticed, as I have, that we are a culture that likes to play favorites. We have our favorite ice cream flavors, our favorite sports teams, our favorite toothpaste. We can often name our favorite beach, our favorite movie, our favorite pizza joint. I was asked recently which of our 7 or 8 UU principles is my favorite, and I almost took the bait. I was about to declare that principle number 4, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, is my top pick, when I caught myself. Now, lucky number 4 may be the principle I believe most distinguishes us as a religion, because it does, but my favorite? Upon deeper reflection, it struck me that the established 7 UU principles and the 8th one that many congregations have adopted over the past couple years, they're not meant to serve as a menu of possibilities or a list to rank or choose from. I'll take principle number 2, but I'm not really into principle number 7. It doesn't really work that way. Nor are they meant to approximate a bona fide creed to adopt or believe in. However, when we view our principles as an integrated whole, as we might view a poem, a remarkable thematic symmetry and resonance emerges. Today, I want to look at the whole of those principles and how they are evolving in our modern world, and how these 7 or 8 foundational rocks were mined, tumbled, polished, and deposited into our religious jar. It's worth noting and understanding that our 7 UU principles possess some deep roots, despite having been approved in their current form as recently as 1985. If we return to our rock metaphor, the principles have been mined from sources as diverse as earth-centered traditions, Reformation ideals, to postmodern feminist sensibilities and liberation theologies. Here's a thumbnail overview of their evolution. As the Reverend Edward Frost explains so well in the introduction to his book, With Purpose and Principle, our Unitarian and Universalist forebears knew well enough that a religion needs to be able to tell the world what its adherents value. The difficulty for these free liberal churches lay in formulating a declaration without usurping the freedom of belief and thought, cherished and firmly defended by its members. Principle 4, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. In 1803, the Universalists adopted the Winchester Confession, an anti-Calvinist statement of belief that affirmed the central doctrine of a new American religion, that in God's love and forbearance, all souls could be saved. Not that they would be saved. This is a misunderstanding about universalism, but that salvation was universally available. And this was in stark contrast to Calvinism and the idea that it was decided before you were even born whether you would be saved or not. A liberty clause was added to enable congregations to adopt their own statement of belief, provided they didn't reject the general profession. In 1899 and again in 1935, the Universalists adopted new, evolving professions of faith framed in more contemporary language. So in effect, we have always been an evolving faith, and so it goes right up to the present as our denomination considers the impact of another revision of the UUA bylaw, Article 2, which currently houses our principles. The one we know, the ones we know, the ones we love, the ones we worry about losing. The Unitarians, on the other hand, never fashioned a creed or even a profession of faith. Their religion had been based on the rejection of the doctrine of the Trinity, which is where they got their name, Unitarian as opposed to Trinitarian, and it focused on the teachings and example of a human Jesus rather than a divine Christ. The heady Unitarian set, they developed moral philosophies, notably at Harvard, a college founded by Unitarians, based on virtues such as conscience and reason. They were the head to the Universalist heart. During era after era of controversy, Unitarians made a series of evolving theological statements, first in 1825, again in 1894, and finally after World War II. Not surprisingly, as the merger of the two religions was under construction in 1961, that's how recently the two denominations came together. And yes, it was all men. Men found themselves enmeshed in a delicate and tricky process of concocting an acceptable list of 6 principles. In the end, the compromise list reflected the era, with much patriarchal and limited language such as, I quote, love to God and love to man, the dignity of man and the ideals of brotherhood, at least they were consistent, and a reference to our Judeo-Christian heritage. But nothing especially interrelational or warm, no love language, no liberation language, lots of head. A decade later, in the 70s, amidst an upsurge of feminist sensibilities, the UU Women's Federation raised the issue of revision, and after another 10 years of study and dialogue, a less sexist version of the principles, drafted by various women's groups, was presented to our General Assembly in 1981. And I wasn't there, but I hear that was a whopper of a General Assembly with a great deal of dissent and anger and walking out and so forth. It didn't pass. Yet this effort spurred the creation and empowerment of a mixed gender committee to study and update the principles. And finally, after much careful tinkering, UU style, the current configuration of 7 principles was approved at the GA in 1985 to what one committee member recalls as, quote, loud applause, sighs of relief, tears, and a few shrugs of wait and see. The Reverend Walter Royal Jones, one esteemed member of that committee, considers most significant the switch from the free and disciplined search for truth in the 1961 statement to the current free and responsible search, suggesting that the search takes place in community, a community you need to be responsible to and for. Jones reflects that apart from the Quakers and their time-honored preference for consensus, it's unlikely that in the history of American religion provides any comparable example of such intentional and committed use of inclusive, non-hierarchical processes to produce a guiding statement. So we should be proud of that. I reckon that even if you are brand spanking new to the congregation, maybe if it's your first time, this isn't true, but if you're fairly new, you can catch on to the 7 principles pretty quickly and their central place in our life. And if you stick around for a while, you'll discover that they are just ubiquitous to the Unitarian Universalist community. They appear in the front of the hymnal. They're posted in our hallway in a beautiful calligraphy that was done by a member, and they're even recited in unison as a weekly affirmation in many congregations. The principles have guided our denomination's work in social justice and shaped the development of our religious exploration programs. There is a children's version of our principles as well that's very simple. And even Beacon Press, which is the UU publishing house, if you didn't know, Beacon Press is a UU publisher, has required its editors to include with every proposal a statement explaining how the prospective volume would support one or more of our principles. Yet, Even with what appears to be consensus about the primacy of the principles in our self-identity, these 7 seemingly simple statements of affirmation have stirred up dissent once again. On one hand, they are besmirched as bumper sticker theology, too broad, prosaic, and general to represent the depth of who we are and what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist in real time, in the real world. And on the other end of the scale, they are derided as overly creedal, even subversive. My witty colleague, Richard Gilbert, recalls a ditty written by a member in his Building Your Own Theology class, who set this dilemma to a popular show tune. Got no dogma, got no creed, these are the things that you don't need. Meeting Sunday, please do come, join us round our vacuum. I don't know that I agree with that, but it's clever. Sometimes we so amuse ourselves by this self-inflicted humor, writes Gilbert, that we don't comprehend the seriousness of its implications. In the absence of a creed, we UUs all process and no substance. If we cannot have a faith based on a creed, dogma, or ecclesiastical authority because we don't want that, what do we base it on? How do we explain ourselves? Spiritual navel-gazing can surely lead to toxic individualism or befuddlement, or both, a danger to avoid. Upon entering our UU communities, we have voluntarily thrown off the cloak of rigid creeds. And despite the initial sensation of joyful release, we may come to feel a little bit like a carpenter without a toolbox. How do you pound a nail with a phantom hammer, we might wonder. For better or worse, the UU principles do not approximate a capital C creed. We will do without that, thank you very much. Yet according to the Reverend Lex Crane, the integrated whole of our principles does provide a bedrock of shared reality assumptions and religious underpinnings for most UUs. They are promoting the creative cultural evolution of humanity, acknowledging our place in the interdependent web, humbly accepting that there are mysteries beyond our grasp, a faith in the power and potential of humanity, a commitment to the search for truth and meaning, leading to transformation, and a comprehensive love, caring about the quality of life for all beings. In sum, our principles carry the essential spirit rather than the letter of religious ideals. I like Crane's thinking, but that list is so darn intellectual and it's a whopper of a mouthful. It reflects the braininess we have carried through our history, maybe over-tinkering. It mentions a comprehensive love, but is that enough heart for the world we live in 2024? Even without doctrine, it is okay for us UUs to have a strong faith. Faith is not a dirty word, balancing thought and feeling, and stand firmly within it. Heinrich Heine, the German poet, was gazing with a friend at an old cathedral, and the friend asked, "Tell me, Heinrich, why don't people build piles like that anymore?" And the poet replied, "My dear friend, in those days, people had convictions, and we moderns have opinions. And it takes more than opinions to build a Gothic cathedral." Now, more than 60 years after the adoption of those 7 familiar principles, we are in the process of another painful growth spurt in our uncommon denomination, and we are examining our convictions, our values, our heart-centered, bone-deep covenant with one another, with society, and the planet. I mentioned earlier that there were loud applause, sighs of relief, tears, and a few shrugs of wait and see when the current principles with the 7th added was adopted in 1961 at the time of the merger. There have been some similar reactions to the effort to revamp those principles today. In truth, they should have been reviewed much sooner than they had, according to the UUA bylaws. But that is happening now with mixed reception, that is an understatement. And I might add splinter groups, protest coalitions, conspiracy theories, nasty newsletters, threats, and a letter that many of us signed that has now come to be known as the Make Nice letter, asking people to engage with this issue with the values we say we share as Unitarian Universalists. A commission was empowered to draft this revision, a recasting of our familiar principles as values and covenants, with further statements regarding inspirations, inclusion, and freedom of belief. Our responsive call to worship today was based on the language of those shared values, and each of you will receive a copy of the Article 2 revision for our discussion that will be part of this service, so you will have it in front of you. The prominent section outlining values and covenants begins with the statement, "Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values." An earlier version stated this as, "Love is the enduring force that holds us together." A simple, lovely, heart-centered, utterly new preamble that I chose as my sermon title today. And I like it. Love is the enduring force that holds us together. It now goes on to say, we are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the discipline of love. And then inseparable from one another, these shared values are, and there are many of them, but there are 7 of them. There are many words, I should say, that go around these, but there are 7 of them. Coincidence? Perhaps. Love, justice, transformation, generosity, pluralism, equity, and interdependence. And much of the wording of our current principles have been woven into the pieces of those values. Each section includes words such as we celebrate, we declare, we cultivate, we honor, rather than we affirm and promote. A language shift which preferences who we are in community rather than who we are individually. The wording of the 8th principle, which I don't know that this congregation has spent much time talking about, but the wording of this principle that was adopted by hundreds of congregations about a commitment to dismantling oppression and racism is included in the section on justice. Active, spiritual, and holistic words such as gratitude, hope, compassion, transform, celebrate, learn, humility, care, respect, repair, embrace, solidarity, and beloved community appear in the draft that is currently available. They're all wonderful words. This drafting and review process has definitely pushed some buttons because it nudged us out of our comfort zones. The principles are comfortable, familiar, and compact. Adding the 8th principle created some important grit and friction, and now this revamp is very much disrupting the status quo. I don't exaggerate when I tell you that people have left Unitarian Universalism over the adoption of the 8th principle. Of course, as we know, we have had people leave our congregations over the sale of property and the paint color on the walls, or some old dust-up with a minister that could have been resolved over tea, or because the minister didn't defer to our religious theological language. People have left over our sexuality education program, OWL, and people have asked because they were offended when they were asked to pledge. And people will leave over Article 2 as well. I am sure of it, not necessarily here, I hope not, but this saddens me so much. You may wonder if I'm up here doing a sales pitch, and I'm not. You may wonder if I'm asking you to just swallow whatever the UUA wants to feed you. I would not do that. I am fiercely vigilant about creeping illiberalism in our denomination and whether we are being pressured to speak the language of the movement at all times. I don't go for that at all. And to their credit, the Article 2 Commission has held so many open feedback sessions to gather reactions and suggestions about this new format. And I've received a number of emails with the header, "We've heard you." Each congregation needs to decide freely and individually where they stand with this revision and be clear about why they stand in that perspective before advising their delegates on how to vote at General Assembly next week. And we will be discussing that this morning. We have 2 delegates, Katie Norris and John, are going to General Assembly as our delegates, and we need to let them know how we feel. I won't be voting, but you need to let them know how you feel. And not just act out of fear over what you might lose, but be honest in our conversation about the issues. Apparently, many people want to see where our beloved and familiar principles connect to each other in the new section of the document, and I appreciate that. It reassures me that we are not bending too far into a creed. And yet, ironically, the word creed itself is from the word credo, which isn't even about thoughts or opinions, but rather what we are willing to give our heart to. It's about love, the enduring force that holds us together. There's an old joke among UUs that suggests that God is optional in the New England Meeting House, church is optional in the Midwestern Fellowship, and that clothes are optional west of the Rockies. Don't get any ideas. True or false, and it is true, Unitarian Universalism has very different shapes and shadings throughout the country. True or false, the one thing that shouldn't be optional, east or west, high church or low, fellowship or meeting house, is a commitment to evolve and covenant together as a beloved community to work through the muddle, to not leave, to engage. When we accept the call to Unitarian Universalism, we enter into that covenant with one another and with our principles and values. We affirm, we promote, we celebrate, we honor, we cultivate. We live by convictions rather than opinions in cathedrals or temples or roadside shrines of our own making. We agree to care for and repair the planet and to preserve the delicate but essential balance between individualism and interdependence, freedom and responsibility. So may it be for us as we move and act and change and covenant with 8 small pebbles in our shoes, reminding us of who we are and what we might become on this shared journey. May love be the enduring force that holds us together, and may the center hold. Blessed be, blessed we, and amen. Our final hymn is The Fire of Commitment. It's number 1028 in the teal hymnal, the small green hymnal. Please rise as you are welcome.
Fire
Half of each week's Sunday collection is shared with a local organization that doing good works in our area. This second quarter, we are sharing the bounty with East County Rising Community Projects, a grassroots organization energizing East Multnomah County residents to create equitable, livable communities centering underrepresented and marginalized people. If you are a first-time visitor, please let the basket pass you by. You are our guest today. We now gratefully receive the gifts of this congregation.
Do we have the microphone?
Yeah, hold on. There we go.
Okay, yeah. So, how many of you have already thought about Article 2 and how you feel about it? Okay, how many of you are sort of like, oh wow, this is kind of the first time I've heard about this. I didn't realize it was such a big thing going on. Yeah, it has been really consumed a tremendous amount of time, energy, brain cells, and emotional labor within our denomination over the past couple years. So this month, there will be a vote, and I think there'll be a lot of vigorous debate at General Assembly. So thoughts you have about this? My sermon, I think, captured sort of the situation and what is happening. The principles are very familiar, they're very compact. This is a much different kind of statement. So what are some thoughts you have? If you want to stand up, people will be able to see you and hear you. No, you don't have to come forward.
Okay, I gave this a lot of thought a year ago. I haven't given it a lot of thought since, but my position has stayed pretty much the same. I think the revisions are good. I think the graphics are good. I think those things, they capture an overall view, but they don't really tell a story to the first-time viewer or the first-time person who is being introduced to UU philosophy and thought. You have to go deeper into it. You have to get into it. You have to kind of tear it apart in order to find out how these 6 or 7 circles relate to the center circle, relate to the old, and The thing about the 7 principles is you could sit down with it, look at it, and say, okay, this is what these people are committed to in a fairly short period of time, and have an idea of whether you wanted to invest more into thinking about their philosophy, that philosophy. I don't see anything wrong with making the changes. I think either as a church here or the broader church should keep the old principles as an adjunct to the changes, at least for a period of time, while we find out how this thing plays out and let it play out over time instead of being a sudden change. So my advice would be leave them side by side, draw on what you choose, and let them be there for the new people coming in to say, this is part of what we're about.
Yeah, that's interesting, Keen. First of all, the UUA won't come in and rip things down from the wall or tell us we can't love our principles and have them. It is pretty hard to put the new wording on a bookmark, right? I mean, you know, or a poster. And I have to say, I do agree. I don't see why we can't keep the principles we have, add the 8th one, and then have this longer statement of commitments. And maybe that's something that will come up at General Assembly, John and Katie, if you're watching at home, you know, that maybe it doesn't have to be an either or. I wonder if that wouldn't satisfy a lot of people. What other thoughts do you have? Yeah.
I've been a Unitarian been a Unitarian for more than 25 years. I'm new to this congregation, but okay. I said I've been a Unitarian for a long time, new here, but what prompted this, I guess, is maybe it was during COVID, I wasn't attending or whatever, but I'm not familiar with what prompted the change.
Yeah. Well, what prompted the change is that the UUA, the bylaws say that every 15 years, the principles, Article 2, see, Article 2 refers to the bylaw. It's Article 2 in the bylaws. That every 15 years, there's supposed to be a commission that revises or at least looks at the principles. It's been longer than 15 years. So that's what occasioned the revision, overdue revision, and actually it's been all over the UU world. It's been out there. I guess it hasn't been talked about here, or there hasn't been any kind of spotlight on it. But yeah, Tyler.
Just to comment on like what we were just talking about right now, it seems like a year isn't very long. You know, every 15 years, all of a sudden, like we just heard about this a year ago.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last time.
It just seems like a year is still not a very long time to like have the discourse and like have the word get out. And
It's been 3 years.
3 years? All right, yeah, I'm fairly new. I'm a new UU.
I mean, it's been 3 long, difficult years.
So,
Lots of infighting.
so what was the delay in getting the word out? Like, why are some people just barely hearing about this a year ago?
Okay, I think it's not that they've just been hearing about it, it's that they haven't been exposed to it. I mean, you're a fairly new member, and it seems like this hasn't been a topic of conversation before here at East Rose. No, and you know, maybe not everybody reads UU World, but there have been extensive articles about Article 2. It's also been on the website, the UU website. I think that this is interesting because I wasn't required to preach about this today. I wanted to preach about it, and I want you to know what's going on. It has been 3 years, and there's been a lot of tumult around this. There was one point when a revision was rejected and they went forward anyway. I mean, there's been some bad juju around it, but I think they're kind of on good footing. Again, I'm not telling you to accept it or not accept it, but it has actually been a pretty long process. Yeah.
This is the question. Didn't the racial equality component come in much before the 3 years? Hasn't that been kind of a thing festering?
Well, the eighth principle project was actually brought forward by a group within the UUA. First, it came from the Black Lives Matter group, and then it came from a BIPOC group that wanted congregations to, and that was a long process to get the eighth principle down from a very wordy paragraph to several sentences. And when I was in Flagstaff, I preached about the eighth principle. We had forums about it, we voted on it, and congregations could adopt the eighth principle. And the hope was that the eighth principle was going to go to GA and either be adopted or not adopted. And then it sort of got woven into this revision. So it's been a bit of a circuitous route. You're shaking your head yes back there. You're familiar with this whole thing? Yes. Uh-huh. Okay.
I really like that this addresses systemic inequality. I mean, I think that's much clearer than it used to be in this. Right, right. But so I like the way they've done that. And I also really like the way that they discuss the inspirations without bringing up Judeo-Christian, Buddhist, this, that, that it's more inclusive. And the values are solid. And I'm a person who lives by my values. I make decisions based on what really matters to me. And I think they've done a really good job as far as revising the principles, but the spirit of the principles is still here. I'm happy with what they've done.
Yeah, I actually think it's a lovely document. I do happen to agree with Keen that I also like the compactness of the principles, particularly for a newcomer, and for an ability to share in a very concise way. I would love to see the two of them stay somehow connected and us not be asked to phase out the 7 principles that we know so well.
I'm John. I come at this from a little different perspective. I spent part of my career doing software and teaching and learning about the principles of how we learn. Short-term memory and our left brain processor handles about 7 items at a time. That's perfectly consistent with 7 principles. It's much slower than our visual processing. Its visual processing is about 100,000 times faster. So for one thing, the graphic in line 21 should be moved to the top to summarize everything that we're talking about. And I agree with Keen on the rest of us. The 7 principles fit the 7 slots in short-term memory that allow us to compact ideas. So it's the way we think. And if our principles don't match how we think, we're not going to think them. So I think I prefer the old set.
Right. Can you handle adding an 8th? Can you open up a door in your brain?
Actually, the classical article on this is the magical number 7 plus or minus 2.
Oh, good.
And so
Whew.
people can handle up to 9, so we actually can go 2 more.
Great. Thank you, John.
And then I'm just going to say the online ones. I do have very strong personal feelings about this, but I'd like to keep them separate, so I'd like you to come back to me. Yeah, so the online ones, I have a comment from Cynthia. Cynthia says, I've read and thought about a lot the suggested changes, and I like them. Brian Dickerson says, it makes the relationship of association to the congregation much more top-down and controlling. He also says, everyone would do well to read the Florida congregation's comments on the change. They make a good argument against it. It's a lovely document, but no one is talking about how it would put more power to control the direction of individuals and congregations. So those are the online ones. And then, yeah, come back to me. I have my own feelings about this.
I'm not sure I understand why it would need to say that. I'm not sure I understand that, but okay. Maybe Brian can clarify why he thinks that's important.
When we were looking, if you look at these and compare them to the 7 things on the wall outside, or the 8 if you go on the website, you wind up with, like, this some people are experiencing as overspecified, very wordy, but the opposite could be said about the others, that they are simple. And I don't know, and in many cases, we've failed them because of their simplicity. I think part of how we failed in, I will not, if you didn't read the articles in the UUA, I will not burden you with the whole sordid story, but there hasn't always been good behavior in regards to internal or external race relations. And part of how we failed that was our principles were so vague, they never called that out in a way that was specific. The same thing is true in other organizations that had very simple principles. What was not called out kind of slid under the doorway there. When I used to work as when I used to work as a psychologist, it didn't explicitly say, the first year I started school, that sleeping with your clients was unethical. It's illegal in many places, but it didn't say it was unethical. And people are like, oh, but it was in the client's best interest. We had to change the rules to say it's never in the client's best interest. It had to be written down because people will interpret things in a way that, like, the writers would never have thought of. And I think we had some of that going on with the 7 simpler versions. What I like about this is that it's much more explicit about us being in relationship to each other and about being in relationship to those outside of the UUA and about being in relationship between congregations. I think that's great. I think that there's going to have to be, for this to be actionable, we're going to have to do a lot of education, like, does everybody here confidently know what beloved community with a capital B and a capital C are? I think it's pretty much, this is a description of the beloved community. It describes it pretty well, but I think we're going to need to perhaps keep it, okay. The point, I guess my point is, I like many of the things about this, but I think it won't be the answer to everything. We're going to have to present the version that doesn't require a college education.
Well, see, it's interesting. I've been wondering, like, first of all, I would not ask or even want us to take down the things on our walls that have the principles. I would expect us to keep those. So I wonder if the UUA is going to publish a pamphlet called UUA Purposes, Covenants, and Shared Values, a little folded, and maybe if not, we will, so that that can be given to people when they visit us along with a bookmark. Maybe we want to buy up all the rest of the principles bookmarks before they're gone. You can see that, I became a Unitarian Universalist in 1988. And so, the principles are what I know, and I do have a very strong fondness for them. And I would like us to be able to have both, personally. I'm not against this. If I was going to GA, I would probably be voting for it, but with my fingers crossed that it didn't head us into a place where we had even more trouble explaining who we were to people, because it's already difficult. Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the comment that over the many years, I'm a Reformed Catholic, so that tells you something. But many people have asked, what is Unitarian Universalist all about? And I do keep a stack of the bookmarks. And I just think it's a great way to, yes, it's simple and it isn't so complete, and the equity issue is not necessarily addressed, but it really gives them, oh, I get, I sort of get it. And so I love that. I would hate to see that gone, although, I'm not opposed to some changes, but yeah, I think it's just a really nice way, rather than have a 3-hour discussion, which they don't want to hear anyway. They just want to know some basics. And so I found it really helpful.
So if you could hand somebody a bookmark and a folded brochure, you pretty much would have accomplished your task, right? Here's simple and here's a little more in depth.
So I was actually raised Unitarian Universalist. I grew up UU. I'm also currently, I believe, the youngest active member of this congregation. And I have incredibly mixed feelings on this. On the one hand, a lot of the opposition to it seems to be rooted in kind of a push against anti-racism, which I do think we need to be more active with supporting equity and inclusion in our congregations. And I do think this does do a good job of making that language more explicit. On the other hand, there isn't as much specific language about the democratic process or the responsible search for meaning. They're both reframed in ways which I find to be more ambiguous, as well as doing the work that also, although it's specifically outlined what it is, I do see where people are coming from when they say like it could cause a structural change within the UU. Personally, my main focus as the person who mostly is managing our social media at the moment and as someone who is very, very active in trying to get us new membership is that as a young person, a lot of us see religion and are scared. I think the transition to the graphic, which I can pull up for us, as well as this big word cloud, does make it harder for people to understand what we are about. And if I saw this as a layperson and I was looking for a community, I would think we were a cult. I'm just gonna say it, and it's a beautiful graphic, but because of the kind of vagueness and word cloud, for my generation at least, I find that it actually creates more confusion rather than less. And I think the sentiment is really, really well-intentioned, but I do worry about us actually doing that work of equity and inclusion and anti-racism versus just focusing on talking about it a lot more, because we do tend to talk a lot more than we act as a denomination.
That's interesting. One second. The comment on the word cloud is interesting. Yeah, I mean, that would require some conversation and why. I mean, this will never appear by itself without words, and we are very wordy, and this is a lot of words. I think one of the concerns that people have had about this process, and one of the conspiracy theories, frankly, is that this is going to lead to the UUA having sort of draconian expectations of congregations, that somebody, and I vetted this with the moderator herself, so I went right to the top, my colleague Meg Riley, and I said, Meg, there's a story going around that the UUA will not recertify congregations unless they prove they, quote unquote, are doing the work. And she wrote back with an expletive. That's complete, fill in the blank. She said, no, that I don't, she said, I know I've heard that. That is not true. The UUA isn't going to make congregations show they're doing the work. You know, we want congregations to live these values and live these covenants. That's all we're asking. You know, but there's also been conspiracy theories about other things having to do with the UUA. People have been triggered by the phrase to heal historic injustices, which I don't understand why that has triggered people. You know, I think we're living in this era of conspiracy theories where we think something, you know, I don't know, that could be something that it's not saying it is, and what will we do about that? And so I want to say I do think the UUA has the right spirit in mind with this. And Deanna, you wanted to say something. But I need to use the microphone.
I think Ralph was holding his hand before I was, though.
I'm sorry.
Do you want to go, Ralph?
Did you want to say something?
Oh, it's just, having been around UUs for a while, you know, everybody says we're wordy. People think in pictures, they think in words. Words are kind of plastic, and that's the problem, because words change meaning fairly quickly in culture. Pictures, of course, are even more plastic, but our brains like to do pictures. And I'm not sure, you know, how you get clarity to somebody who's looking for a place to go to church and spend their energies and their love if they feel the words are trickery and Yeah, too many of them, and yeah, that's, you know, and some people who think brilliantly don't use words.
Yeah. Jan.
So I really feel like we're unified by what we're for rather than what we're against, and that we can unify under what we're for statements. And I think that, you know, the worth and dignity, the inherent worth and dignity of every person already is anti-racist. I think that the democratic process, you know, being everywhere is already anti-racist. I think that social justice is already anti-racist. So I don't know why we'd be like, and this is what we're against. Like, I don't think that oppositions are principles.
Right, and again, the eighth principle was meant to explicitly mention racism and oppression.
Yeah, but I think that's already covered.
Sure. Well, when I had the forum in my last congregation, and that came up a lot, there were other voices that said, it's time for our denomination to explicitly say, we will fight oppression for LGBTQ people, we will fight anti-racism, to be very explicit in our principles.
We have another online. Brian Dickinson says, sorry, but my comment was not based on conspiracy theories. It was based on reading thoughtful arguments. Personally, I have read the one that he's talking about. It does make some good arguments. Again, I agree that we do need to be explicitly saying those things personally. We've been able to make statements as a denomination against things that are oppressive before, and I think we could do that without sacrificing our historic principles. It reminds me of in 2012 when the Canadian UU split off, the Canadian split, and I worry that this may cause another fracture like that, and we don't need more.
Exactly. I mean, there aren't that many of us. We don't really need to splinter off. Hold on. You wanted to say, this is Nicole.
Hi, so my name's Nicole. It's my first time here, but I was a board member of a lay-led congregation in West Texas and have engaged in this process with the UU and the adoption of the eighth principle as well. So I wanted to join you guys today in this conversation and kind of hear your thoughts and feedback. And since we're talking about this, I thought I'd share my opinions. So I feel like the 7 principles and the 8 adopted principle makes more sense than, you know, this article that we were handed today. Just in the call for clarity of sharing who we are and the identity of a community, I think having the concise language, I'm kind of like a 4th principle favorite myself. When anybody asks me, well, what's UU? It's kind of the first thing I blurt out, just, you know, this is what we are and this is how we do it. And I see people see themselves in that when we share that. So that's like an expansion tool for me. And then when I think about just the value of what has been done in this work, I think we can honor the value of the call for action. When I read the language and compare the language and the 7 principles to this new language, I feel that this has a lot of action words that intentionally has action words. And when I think about kind of some of the opening readings that you guys shared here today about, you know, being movers and marchers, I think there's, you know, maybe just a call within our communities for that activity. And that's maybe where a lot of this is resonating from, you know, sitting during the pandemic and seeing communities. And, you know, I was the office manager as well. So I kind of had to try to engage in a community. And that ING, the living, the singing, the loving, that part of the community, I think that's more of like where the UUA is trying to help people get back into the community portion of this with the call for activity with the values. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. And it was good to have you here and hear your thoughts today. The action words in the revision are extremely intentional. That was part of what they wanted to do with the revision. They use the word covenant a lot. They use words like support, advance, foster, support, and so forth. We're going to need to wrap this up, unfortunately, since we have Lois, you wanted to say something and you haven't spoken. Hold on, John. If there's anyone that hasn't expressed an opinion or thoughts yet, I'd like to give them that opportunity first. John? Here.
Well, first I'd like to ask, since I'm a delegate,
I'm going to ask people to raise their
Okay.
We are going to take a vote.
Okay, but what I was going to ask was, since I'm a delegate, I do have some really strong opinions on it, and I have for a couple of years
And
now.
what is your opinion?
That this is 3 pages that I've windowed down from like 12. That I know.
Just yay or nay?
I'm absolute hardcore nay, not only to the rejection of the primacy of our sources in informing our faith, but also in trying, it almost feels insulting the way that they've kind of thrown some of the words of the principles as tokens in with values. I grew up as a Southern Baptist, and I've been around unprincipled values a lot, and that I not only have opinions about this, but about a number of the bylaws that are also proposed to be amended by the report Widening the Circle of Concern, which was the report made by the Commission on Institutional Change, which was 2017 after the Morales ouster. And so there's a lot more going on here than just this revision that is being proposed as changes to this faith. And the language and the attitudes of some of the people that have been working on this are the attitudes of those people, that the people that I've been asking to come in because they're looking for a place that does not ask them to have a dogma, specifically stay away from.
Well, this isn't a dogma, but...
It's not a creed, but it, for me, is approaching a change from a positivist framework to a normative framework. And so it would not necessarily be a creed, but it feels like the beginnings of an orthodoxy, an identitarian one at that.
We have had basically a hidden orthodoxy in our denomination from the start, in that we have certain ideals, then values that we share in common. So the idea that we haven't, I mean, this is a whole nother sermon, the idea that we haven't had orthodoxies is not true. I do not see this as dogma or a creed, because creeds usually begin with, I believe. We believe in the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. This really, John, I'm going to have to say, I respect your opinion, but I think this asks us to act in covenant around shared values. I feel like because it's really getting late, we should wrap this up. But did you want to say something? You haven't spoken.
Yeah, I don't trust the UUA administration at this point. I think they very well could tell you not to publish the 7 principles based off what they're trying to, the changes they're making.
They're not going to come in and rip them down on
The president, Dr. Betancourt, has said that she felt like they were racially inspired and has spoken against them by Immanuel. She said like one was written by Immanuel Kant, I believe, and that because he was a slave owner, therefore he was a writer, so therefore it's, anyhow. So I think my concern, well, one, I feel like the principles are divinely inspired. They're what drew me to Unitarian Universalism, also Reformed Catholic, and what brought my children to them. I'm really concerned about the destructive things I see happening, ministers being defrocked because they're speaking their mind and saying their own beliefs that maybe aren't in line with this. So I think you have to know some of the things happening behind too.
So I only know of one minister who had her fellowship revoked because she was uncooperative, but most of the ministers who have dissented around Article 2 have left the UUMA voluntarily. So I just want to be clear, the UUA isn't yanking the robes off of ministers. I'm sorry? Ted Eckloff had a run-in not with the UUA, but with the Ministerial Fellowship Committee and the UUMA, and I can talk to you more about what happened there, okay? As a member of the UUMA, we do have a process, and when there's a complaint filed against us, we're supposed to cooperate to have a discussion. Neither of those people were willing to do that. nor were they willing to meet with the Ministerial Fellowship Committee. So I can't really say that they were defrocked. So we're going to vote, because you need to let our delegates know how you feel as a congregation, since they are representing you. So how many of you are in favor of adopting the revisions to Article 2? Please raise your hand. Put your hand up high. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Are you voting back there? How many of you are against Article 2? 1, 2, 3, 4. Did everybody vote? 5, 6. All right, 7, 8. So 12 people have voted for the revision. And how about people online? Have they? And Cynthia is for it. That's 13. And who's against? Okay. Based on that vote, you are letting our delegates know that you support the revision. Okay, that doesn't mean our delegates can't have their own point of view, but it is important that our delegates represent not just themselves, but the congregation. I would really strongly advocate in the discussion, which you are allowed to be part of, that we be allowed to keep the principles as part of our literature, as part of how we express ourselves, as what we give to people who come to see us along with this new language, and that in no way that the UUA make a promise to congregations that they will not force them to give up the principles as part of their identity. How do y'all feel about that concept? Raise your hand if you like that idea. That we will keep the principles as part of our identity, that we will ask the UUA to not do anything explicit to force congregations to give up the principles as part of their identity and part of how they express themselves, in addition to this new language. So there is a potluck waiting for us. And thank you. This has been such a rich and important conversation. Thank you so much for staying for it. We're going to extinguish the chalice. And our benediction is by my colleague, Joe Cherry. Let the center hold. This is my, and it's so fitting after this conversation, this is my prayer. Please let the center hold. The center is what holds our faith together. The strength of the center is what allows us to stretch farther into the future, to the unknown, the untried, the uncertain, the unnerving, the places where growth happens. Let the center be strong. And let the center of this living tradition move with the times. Let it lead the times. Let it embody compassion, equity, demand justice. Let our center hold strong as an old oak tree, flexible as a willow tree, life-giving as an orange tree, evergreen as a pine tree, and as beautiful as the almond tree in blossom. So may it be.
better than.
Mary knows you're hungry. So, fortunately, announcements is only one written one that was brought to me. June 23rd, before and after the service, John Netherton would like to show all interested people how to prepare coffee. He'll need to write a guide, but demonstration is easier, seeing with your eyes. Plus, you get coffee. Has there anything coming online?
Does not look like it.
So announcements, short and sweet, that's wonderful. The service is now ended. People here at East Rose, you are invited to remain. And I don't know if there's coffee, but there is potluck, so come. Even if you didn't bring anything, come to potluck. And hope to see you next week. And online participants, I think, go to YouTube, right?
Yes.
Yes, YouTube if you're online.
Lunch with the minister will be this week and then not next week. So we've been having a lovely time. If you want to come,